The Disaster of the Gladden Fields. After the fall of Sauron, Isildur, the son and heir of Elendil, returned to Gondor. There he assumed the Elendilmere as King of Arnor, and proclaimed his sovereign lordship over all the Dunedain in the north and in the south, for he was a man of great pride and vigour. He remained for a year in Gondor, restoring its order and defining its bounds, but the greater part of the army of Arnor returned to Eriador by the Númenórean road from the fords of Isen to Fornost. When he at last felt free to return to his own realm, he was in haste, and he wished to go on first to Imladris, for he had left his wife and youngest son there, and he had moreover an urgent need for the Council of Elrond. He therefore determined to make his way north from Osgiliath, up the vales of Anduin, to Cirith Ffôn and Andrath, the high climbing pass of the north that led down to Imladris. He knew the land well, for he had journeyed there often before the War of the Alliance, and had marched that way to the war with men of the Eastern Arnor in the company of Elrond. The swift, maybe, for mounted men, but he had no horses fit for riding. Safer, maybe, in former days, but Sauron was vanquished, and the people of the Vales had been his allies in victory. He had no fear, save for weather and weariness, but these men must endure whom need sends far abroad in Middle-earth. So it was, as is told in the legends of later days, that the second year of the Third Age was waning when Isildur set forth from Osgiliath early in Ivaneth, expecting to reach Imladris in 40 days by mid-Narbeleth, ere winter drew nigh in the north. At the east gate of the bridge on a bright morning, Meneldil bade him farewell. Go now with good speed, and may the sun of your setting out not cease to shine on your road. With Isildur went his 3 sons, Elundur, Aratan, and Cayyy, and his guard of 200 knights and soldiers, stern men of Arnor and war-hardened. Of their journey nothing is told until they had passed over the Dargalad, and on northward into the wide and empty land south of Greenwood the Great. On the 20th day, as they came within far sight of the forest crowning the highlands before them with a distant gleam of the red and gold of Ivaneth, the sky became overcast, and a dark wind came up from the Sea of Rhûn, laden with rain. The rain lasted for 4 days, so when they came to the entrance of the vales between Lorien and Amon Lanc, Isildur turned away from the Anduin, swollen with swift water, and went up the steep slopes on its eastern side to gain the ancient paths of the sylvan elves that ran near the eaves of the forest. So it came to pass that late in the afternoon on the 13th day of their journey, they were passing the north borders of the Gladden Fields, and marching along a path that led to Thranduil's realm, as it then was. The fair day was waning. Above the distant mountains clouds were gathering, reddened by the misty sun as it drew down towards them. The deeps of the valley were already in grey shadow. The Dunedain were singing, for their day's march was near its end, and 3 parts of the long road to Imladris were behind them. To their right the forest loomed above them at the top of steep slopes running down to their path, below which the descent into the valley bottom was gentler. Suddenly, as the sun plunged into cloud, they heard the hideous cries of orcs, and saw them issuing forth from the forest and moving down the slopes, yelling their war cries. In the dimmed light their number could only be guessed, but the Dunedain were plainly many times, even to 10 times outnumbered. Isildur commanded a Thangale to be drawn up, a shield wall of 2 serried ranks that could be bent back at either end if outflanked, until at need it became a closed ring. If the land had been flat or the slope in his favour, he would have formed his company into a deernath, and charged the orcs, hoping by the great strength of the Dunedain and their weapons to cleave a way through them and scatter them in dismay. But that could not now be done. The shadow of foreboding fell upon his heart. "The vengeance of Sauron lives on, though he may be dead," he said to Elendil, who stood beside him. "There is cunning and design here. We have no hope of help. Moria and Lorien are now far behind, and Thranduil 4 days' march ahead. And we bear burdens of worth beyond all reckoning," said Elendil, for he was in his father's confidence. The orcs were now drawing near. Isildur turned to his esquire. "Otar," he said, "I give this now into your keeping." And he delivered to him the great sheath and the shards of Narsil, Elendil's sword. "Save it from capture by all means that you can find, and at all costs, even at the cost of being held a coward who deserted me. Take your companion with you and flee. Go, I command you." Then Otar knelt and kissed his hand, and the 2 young men fled down into the dark valley. If the keen-eyed orcs marked their flight, they took no heed. They halted, briefly, preparing their assault. First they let fly a hail of arrows, and then suddenly, with a great shout, they did as Isildur would have done, and hurled a great mass of their chief warriors down the last slope against the Dunedain, expecting to break up their shield wall. But it stood firm. The arrows had been unavailing against the Númenórean armour. The great men towered above the tallest orcs, and their swords and spears far outreached the weapons of their enemies. The onslaught faltered, broke and retreated, leaving the defenders little harmed, unshaken behind piles of fallen orcs. It seemed to Isildur that the enemy was withdrawing towards the forest. He looked back. The red rim of the sun gleamed out from the clouds as it went down behind the mountains. Night would soon be falling. He gave orders to resume the march at once, but to bend their course down towards the lower and flatter ground where the orcs would have less advantage. Maybe he believed that after their costly repulse they would give way, though their scouts might follow him during the night and watch his camp. That was the manner of orcs, who were most often dismayed when their prey could turn and bite. But he was mistaken. There was not only cunning in the attack, but fierce and relentless hatred. The orcs of the mountain were stiffened and commanded by grim servants of Barad-dûr, sent out long before to watch the passes. And though it was unknown to them, the ring, cut from his black hand 2 years before, was still laden with Sauron's evil will, and called to all his servants for their aid. The Dunedain had gone scarcely a mile when the orcs moved again. This time they did not charge, but used all their forces. They came down on a wide front which bent into a crescent and soon closed into an unbroken ring about the Dunedain. They were silent now, and kept at a distance out of the range of the dreaded steel bows of Númenor, though the light was fast failing and Isildur had all too few archers for his need. He halted. There was a pause, though the most keen-eyed among the Dunedain said that the orcs were moving inwards, stealthily, step by step. Elendur went to his father, who was standing dark and alone, as if lost in thought. "Tarinya," he said, "what of the power that would cow these foul creatures and command them to obey you? Is it then of no avail?" "Alas, it is not, Senya. I cannot use it. I dread the pain of touching it, and I have not yet found the strength to bend it to my will. It needs one greater than I now know myself to be. My pride has fallen. It should go to the keepers of the three." At that moment there came a sudden blast of horns, and the orcs closed in on all sides, flinging themselves against the Dunedain with reckless ferocity. Night had come, and hope faded. Men were falling, as some of the greater orcs leaped up, 2 at a time, and dead or alive with their weight bore down the Dunedain, so that other strong claws could drag him out and slay him. The orcs might pay 5 to 1 in this exchange, but it was too cheap. Kayyy was slain in this way, and Aratan mortally wounded in an attempt to rescue him. Elendur, not yet harmed, sought Isildur. He was rallying the men on the east side where the assault was heaviest, for the orcs still feared the Elendilmere that he bore on his brow and avoided him. Elendur touched him on the shoulder, and he turned fiercely, thinking an orc had crept behind. "My king," said Elendur, "Kayyy is dead, and Aratan is dying. Your last counsellor must advise, nay, command you, as you commanded Otar. Go, take your burden, and at all costs bring it to the keepers, even at the cost of abandoning your men, and me." "King's son," said Isildur, "I knew that I must do so, but I feared the pain, nor could I go without your leave. Forgive me and my pride that has brought you to this doom." Elendur kissed him. Go now," he said. Isildur turned west, and drawing up the ring that hung in a wallet from a fine chain about his neck, he set it upon his finger with a cry of pain, and was never seen again by any eye upon Middle-earth. But the Elendilmere of the west could not be quenched, and suddenly it blazed forth red and wrathful as a burning star. Men and orcs gave way in fear, and Isildur, drawing a hood over his head, vanished into the night. Of what befell the Dunedain only this was later known. Ere long they all lay dead, save one, a young esquire stunned and buried under fallen men. So perished Elendur, who should afterwards have been king, and as all foretold who knew him, in his strength and wisdom, and his majesty without pride, one of the greatest, the fairest of all the seed of Elendil, most like to his grandsire. Now of Isildur it is told that he was in great pain and anguish of heart, but at first he ran like a stag from the hounds until he came to the bottom of the valley. There he halted to make sure that he was not pursued, for orcs could track a fugitive in the dark by scent and needed no eyes. Then he went on more warily. The wide flats stretched on into the gloom before him, rough and pathless with many traps for wandering feet. So it was that he came at last to the banks of Anduin in the dead of night, and he was weary, for he had made a journey that the Dunedain on such ground could have made no quicker, marching without halt and by day. The river was swirling dark and swift before him. He stood for a while, alone and in despair. Then in haste he cast off all his armour and weapons, save a short sword at his belt, and plunged into the water. He was a man of strength and endurance that few, even of the Dunedain of that age, could equal, but he had little hope to gain the other shore. Before he had gone far, he was forced to turn almost north against the current, and strive as he might, he was ever swept down towards the tangles of the Gladden fields. They were nearer than he had thought, and even as he felt the stream slacken and had almost won across, he found himself struggling among great rushes and clinging weeds. There suddenly he knew that the ring had gone. By chance, or chance well used, it had left his hand and gone where he could never hope to find it again. At first so overwhelming was his sense of loss that he struggled no more, and would have sunk and drowned. But swift as it had come, the mood passed. The pain had left him, the great burden had been taken away. His feet found the riverbed, and heaving himself up out of the mud, he floundered through the reeds to a marshy islet close to the western shore. There he rose up out of the water, only a mortal man, a small creature lost and abandoned in the wilds of Middle-earth. But to the night-eyed orcs that lurked there on the watch he loomed up, a monstrous shadow of fear with a piercing eye like a star. They loosed their poisoned arrows at it and fled, needlessly. For Isildur unarmed was pierced through the heart and throat, and without a cry he fell back into the water. No trace of his body was ever found by elves or men. So passed the first victim of the malice of the Masterless Ring, Isildur, second king of all the Dunedain, lord of Arnor and Gondor, and in that age of the world, the last.